Around 5, 6 months ago, yeah, around 5, 6, 7 months ago, I made a video called. I made videos about Paul McCartney's albums. So we made one on McCartney 1, 2, 3, New, Ram, Tug of War, Egypt Station, and when we made Wings, we made also couple Wings reviews like Been on the Run, Venus and Mars. I didn't add. I'm gonna put Wildlife at number. Hold on. But yeah, I'm gonna start with my least favorite and work my way up. So my least favorite is Wildlife. My reasons for that was Wildlife really was a little, like, in my opinion, a little less. It didn't. It was a good album, but didn't give that much character to it, and it ultimately failed a little bit, if you ask me, in that whole aspect. But honestly, it's not that bad of an album compared to others, and I kind of like it more in London Town, but I always like to switch those two out. Speaking of which, coming in at number 13 is London Town. London Town was released in 1978, the penultimate album of Wings, and would be very lackluster, especially when you get off albums like Wings at the Speed of Sound, Venus and Mars, and Band on the Run. It doesn't go as far as other Wings albums do. Besides one or two tracks, the album doesn't give too much of a good taste in my mouth. It was, and you know what? The original title, Wings in the Water, would have been better. So ultimately, I don't think London Town is much of a good album, but it's better than Wildlife. But I would say that now, number 12, Back to the Egg. Back to the Egg is a good album. Don't get me wrong. Released in 1979, it is the final Wings album to be released. But again, it feels very lackluster. It doesn't feel that good. It's kind of forgettable. It's got good songs on it, don't get me wrong. It's a good form of an album, but ultimately it doesn't give off more of a better energy like others do. 12. Number 11, Red Rose Speedway. Red Rose Speedway was released in 1970 and early 1973. And the best song on it, in my opinion, is Live and Let Die. Live and Let Die is such a action song and was used for the movie Agent Live and Let Die, the James Bond movie of the same title. Yes. But besides that, the song really was starting to find its identity, a little bit of a finding its identity. The songs don't feel that finished, and they're overall more memorable than than ones previously. Now, as we move into number 10, these are the albums I actually love. Number 10, Egypt Station. Egypt Station is more of like that Sgt. Pepper's idea, where in songs like The Mad Captain, they don't work that well, if you ask me. The album was released in 2018, but it would also have another version in 2019. Songs on it would become more memorable and wouldn't be as, well, wouldn't be as forgettable. It would be a good idea, but would sometimes fail. And Paul McCartney ultimately did a good job with this album. Number 9, New. New was released in 2013 and would have more of a new 2010s aesthetic. Still having that same Paul McCartney energy, it would be in my opinion, a good album to be for anybody coming into Paul McCartney. And it's good. It's so weird to see him go from McCartney 1 to this. It's so weird. And speaking of New, although the techno vibe was very good for it, it also didn't feel like a Paul McCartney record, if you know what I mean, sometimes. But wouldn't be would be a good album for the 2010s. Altogether, 2010s were a good album for decade for Paul. With three of his best albums, in my opinion, New, Egypt Station, and McCartney 3. But there's a lot more, and you'll start to see more Wings albums as we start to get near the number 8. McCartney 3. Released in 2020 while everyone was around in pandemic, Paul McCartney was getting to work making this album. And ultimately, McCartney 3 is such a good drop in 2020 in the end, giving hope. And the song Find My Way really reminds me of a 60s Paul era song. As you can definitely hear, his voice has become a lot older than it used to be, and it was definitely... But in my opinion, McCartney 3 deserves a lot of respect, because it's an album that's just really good. But like, I ultimately would think McCartney 3 is the least best out of the three McCartney albums. I used to say McCartney 1 was, but I've grown a lot of respect for that. Speaking of which, McCartney 1. My favorite song on McCartney 1, which would be released in 1970. Let's go on to this little. This would be the first album released after the Beatles broke up. Just actually announced a little bit and junk, but the best song obviously is Maybe I'm Amazed. A beautiful song that brings tears to anybody's eyes, in my opinion, and it's got a very good melody as Paul just... Now, I don't know if these early ones match up. This album matches up to All Things Must Pass or Plastic Ono Band, because both those albums, in my opinion, are both better than this. Paul, this just feels like Paul McCartney, and you gotta be respected about Paul. He doesn't ever really change. But as we can get to these top 6, these are the ones I love, and I have nothing but positive things to say. Number 6, Tug of War. Tug of War was released in 1982, and a lot of its songs featured things like... My favorite song on here was Here Today. A sad song where Paul McCartney reminisces and says he was glad John Lennon was in his life. Ultimately released 2 years after John Lennon was shot and killed out of the Dakota. Outside of the Dakota. Definitely it's a sad thing. But Tug of War also had a really good song called Ebony and Ivory. Yeah. Composed with another famous musician. And it would also be around the time he also started working with Michael Jackson. And yeah, Paul was a very experimental guy, and not as much as his friends, but Tug of War just really gives you that I really like the song. It's sad Paul wanting to go into that John Lennon side, and then it's just the Paul we know, trying to get the battle between the two. But coming at number 5 is Wings at the Speed of Sound. Released in 1976, it's one of the best Wings albums, and it's definitely a... Silly Love Song is definitely a really good on this one. The song itself is probably one of the best Wings songs. The bass, the playful bass, how it doesn't even want to do. Now there are some mediocre songs in here, but in my opinion, it's ultimately it's a really good album. And yeah, it's always kind of in a battle between Venus and Mars, but I ultimately pick Venus and Mars over it. Venus and Mars gives more of the Pink Floydian style, in my opinion. And it's such a breathtaking album. Not like Dark Side of the Moon, but it's really just magnificent. Every song on here can put a smile or make you think. I ultimately just have nothing but positive things. But it didn't make my top 3 for one reason. Some of the songs won't stand for the test of time. It's an amazing album for people who love Paul McCartney, and for Wings fans, but ultimately, Band on the Run is the best Wings album, and that's what's coming up number 3. Band on the Run. The album that made people finally realize that Paul McCartney could stand the test of time. It wasn't just someone from the 60s. Songs like Jet, Let Me Roll It, and the title track, make Band on the Run an album not to be messed with. One of the best albums in my opinion. It uses everything it could in a power move of full on. It goes like a jet. The album does not. It wanted to prove that everything people were saying about Paul McCartney was such a false, and it did. And in one kamikaze style move, I don't know, that don't make sense. That's a suicide. But in a straightforward dash of just rock and roll, they proved that Paul McCartney was not just. And let's just look at the circumstances. Paul and Linda were mugged in the country that we're recording this in Africa. And half of his song lyrics were on there. And two of the main the drummer and the guitars both quit right before the flight. And let's just think about that. This album has basically became a phenomenon in my opinion, but it doesn't match up to the top two. Speaking of which, number 2 is McCartney 2. McCartney 2 would be released in 1980, and it was at first hated, with people calling it nothing rubbish. But I'm here to tell you, McCartney 2 is amazing. With songs like Coming Up and Temporary Secretary making a very 80s type sound before 80s sound was even popular. Using the voice, and then you have the bass as it builds up. And then with Coming Up, one of the catchiest songs Paul McCartney's ever wrote, in my opinion. But I ultimately don't think this compares to the best Paul McCartney album. Coming Up at number 1, in my opinion, Ram is the best Paul McCartney album. Throw your pitchforks at me. But songs like Too Many People, Uncle Albert, Dear Boy, and so many more makes this album such a trip. When I heard this, I felt different after I finished it. Seriously. Ram is an album that maybe didn't match up to others like George Harrison's or Imagine It. It released the same year. It doesn't match up to Imagine. But actually, it does. Ram is Paul not caring what the others were saying about him. John Lennon called Ram rubbish. But in my opinion, Ram wasn't rubbish. In fact, Ram is probably the best Beatles solo album. Yeah, then followed by All Things Must Pass. Then probably, in my opinion, Imagine. So, yeah. I know it's kind of controversial. That's my opinion, though. And, I say, like Paul McCartney does. Make yourself stay healthy, everyone. Peace and love. And she can be a belly dancer. I don't need no trail dancer. She could be a neurosurgeon if she's doing nothing urgent. She could be a diplomat, but I don't need a girl like that. See you in the next one.